Hi, welcome to another Photography Simplified video. My name is Chris, and in these videos, I do my best to simplify digital photography for you with the goal of helping you to get out and take great photos. In today's video, we're going to learn all about focus stacking and how you can blend multiple images with different focus points into one image that is fully in focus from the front of your frame all the way to the back. Let's get into it. First off, what is focus stacking? As I mentioned in the intro, focus stacking is when you take multiple images, focusing on different areas within that image, say the foreground, then another focusing on the midground, and another image focusing on the background, and you later combine those images when you're editing into one image that is fully in focus, all the way from the front of the frame to the back. Focus stacking can be very useful for things like macro photography when you're very up close to a subject and you need to take lots of different images to get the whole thing in focus. It's also useful in landscapes if you want to be close to some sort of foreground element like a flower, a rock, or anything really that's close to the lens, but you also want to capture the whole landscape. And focus stacking can be useful for things like product photography. If you're photographing a product and you want to make sure all of the details of that product are sharp and in focus. So, when should you focus stack? Typically, if you're trying to get your whole frame in focus, you'll want to choose a focus point somewhere a third of the way, more or less, into the frame and use a narrower aperture like f11 to f16 or somewhere in there. The problem is, if all of your scene isn't in focus, you can try narrowing your aperture more and going to a higher f-stop number, but we can only narrow it so much. If we've narrowed down our aperture and we still can't get the whole scene in focus, you may need to focus stack. This is often common when you have something close to the lens. Remember, with a closer subject, you're going to have a shallower depth of field. Even with a narrower aperture, when something is close enough to our lens, we can still get a shallow depth of field, making it hard to get an entire scene in focus without focus stacking. On the other hand, this is not an issue if everything is farther away. If you're photographing a scene where there's nothing super close to your lens and everything is at least a couple meters away, you can likely capture the entire scene in focus in one image if you use the right aperture. By the way, if you end up finding this video helpful, please leave a like and subscribe so you can see my other beginner tutorials as well. When you're wanting to know if you should focus stack, you can use a calculation to calculate what's called your hyperfocal distance. And that can be a little complicated, but to keep things simple, you can do a visual test. If you're trying to capture a scene, and you can either get whatever's in the foreground in focus and your background's blurry, or you can get the background in focus, but your foreground's blurry, you'll probably want to focus stack in those situations. The number of images you take to make a focus stacked photo can vary. You could simply take two, one for the foreground in focus and one for the background. You can take three or as many as you would like. It will simply depend on your needs. Also, some cameras may even have a built-in focus stacking mode, especially on newer models, so be sure to check your camera. When taking a focus stack, you'll want to make sure you use a tripod. This is because you don't want anything to change dramatically between the multiple images you're going to take. Likewise, you'll want to use a narrower aperture. This is because if you use a very wide aperture, you're going to have a shallow depth of field and you'll need to take lots of images to be able to get everything in focus, but using a narrower aperture will allow you to use less photos and still get the whole scene in focus. Next, let's look at an example using the camera of how I would take images in order to focus stack later. Okay, this is not the most picturesque scene ever, but it'll help to illustrate when focus stacking can be helpful. So the scene that I have my camera pointed at has this bush that is very close to the lens. Because it's so close, if I focus on the bush, the background is a little blurry and out of focus. Likewise, if I focus on the background, that bush becomes a little blurry and out of focus. This is where you can focus stack. So I'm going to first focus right on the front of my frame with that bush and take an image. Now I'll focus towards the middle of my frame, say the fence, take an image. And finally, I'll focus on the background and take another image. Now I'll be able to combine these three images later using focus stacking into one image that will be completely in focus from the front where the bush is all the way to the background. If you're finding the content in this video helpful, there may be more helpful content in my book, Photography Simplified.
If you would like a visual beginner's guide to photography, check out my book, Photography Simplified, available in both paperback and ebook format on Amazon. The book covers topics including exposure and the exposure triangle, sharpness and focus, gear, composition, editing, and more. It even includes a list of beginner tips. There are helpful graphics to explain each of the topics that are covered in the book. I've put a lot of work into this book to include everything I wish I could have known when I started out. If you think the book could be helpful to you and haven't already, check the link in the description for more information.
Once you've taken your images to focus stack, now it's time to go to the computer and blend them together. For me, Photoshop is a really easy way to do this, although there are other programs that can focus stack images. You can edit your images and make them look prettier either before you stack them together or after. I prefer to edit them before because I like to edit the raw image files. If you're wondering why, check out my video on raw image files versus JPEG image files. So after I edit all of the images, I then will combine them together in Photoshop to create my one focus stacked image. Let's take a look at that using the computer. All right. As far as combining our images into one focus stacked photo, here I have the examples that I took from my example video. I don't love these. They still illustrate it. You can see in this one that the front of the frame is in focus, and this one that the back is in focus. However, it was windy and just not the best condition, so I have these other images we're going to use instead that I took on a different occasion. You can see here I've already done my edits to these so they look nice and pretty, and I just copied and pasted the same settings to all three photos. This first one, you can see that the foreground is in focus. These flowers and everything in the front are nice and sharp. This second image is for the midground. You can see this hill in the background looks nice. And this last one is for the mountains all the way in the back. And you can see in that one that these flowers are out of focus because they're so close to the lens. So once we've done all of our edits, they all look the same. We've copied and pasted those edit settings. We can simply hit Shift, select all of the images, right click, do Edit in Photoshop, and open as layers in Photoshop. All right, you can see that those images opened as layers. They're all just one on top of the other. In the bottom right, we can see 3 layers, one for each of those images. If I hit Shift and select all of them, I can then go up to Edit and do Auto Align Layers. Because we're changing the focus point, the layers may not be 100% lined up, so this will just help to line them up. We can leave everything here on Auto and hit OK. Sometimes this can lead to a little bit of funniness around the edges. You can see a little bit down here, some of that funniness. And that's because when you change the focus point, you're changing that focal length just ever so slightly. And so it ends up leading to this thing called focus breathing between the different images where they're just at a slightly different zoom, more or less. So to clean that up, you can simply just crop that out later. Or right now, if you want to. I'm just going to leave it for the purposes of this video, and this is something I could easily crop out later. But while I still have all 3 of the layers selected, now that they're lined up, we need to blend them. So we'll go Edit, and just under where we just aligned the layers, we're going to click Auto Blend Layers. Now that gives us this option. We're going to click on Stack Images if it's not already selected, and I like to just leave these 2 boxes checked and then hit OK. Now, Photoshop will do its work, and it's really, really smart, and it can recognize what areas are in focus of each image, and it'll just keep those areas. So you can see here now next to our layers, we have different masks. And so you can see this first image, it's keeping the front, and then this one is kind of keeping the middle, and the last one is keeping the back. The white indicates the parts we're keeping, and the black, the parts we're not keeping. Now, sometimes it may not get this exactly right. And so if you ever do need to adjust something, you can simply go into that whatever layer and use the paintbrush and use black to conceal and white to reveal. After you've done the blending, you can also see that now the front of the image is completely in focus. So is the middle and the background. And this is ready to export. And you now have a focus stacked image that is fully in focus from the front of your frame all the way to the back. Finally, remember that we don't naturally see everything in sharp, crisp detail, and so focus stacking may not always be ideal. Sometimes your photo or image may look more natural if some of it is slightly out of focus. You can decide for yourself, each scene or each subject that you're capturing, whether focus stacking would or wouldn't add value. But a good thing to remember is the visual test. If you can either get your foreground or background in focus, but one or the other is blurry, you may need to focus stack that image. Also, when you're focus stacking, one helpful thing to do is to put your hand in front of the lens, take a picture before your focus stack images, and after. That way, when you're combing through your image files, you can see exactly which set of images are the ones that you intended to focus stack. Hopefully this video has been helpful for you and you're excited to get out and try focus stacking. See you in the next one.